Esoteric World, Chapter 12, India 1882 to 1884. In May 1882, the founders bought a large estate in southern India on the Adyar River near Madras and moved the Theosophical Headquarters there at the end of the year. This center soon became the radiating point for worldwide activity. During 1883, Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott traveled from Adyar to various outlying districts, founded branches, received visitors, conducted an enormous correspondence with inquirers, and filled their journal with valuable and scholarly material. The main purpose of that material was to revitalize the dormant interest on the part of Indians in the spiritual worth of their own ancient culture and scriptures. At this time, many Indians and Westerners had contact either by writing or in person with the Mahatmas, and Colonel Olcott practiced mesmeric healing on a wide scale until February 1884, when he left for London to petition the British government on behalf of the Buddhists of Ceylon. H.P. Blavatsky, then in poor health, decided to travel with him to Europe. 12A AP Synod, December 1882 to March 1883, Adyar, Madras. On the 16th of December 1882, a farewell entertainment was given by native friends to the founder of the Theosophical Society just before their departure from Bombay to take up their residence at Adyar, Madras, where a house had been purchased by the society by subscription. The house at Madras was a great improvement on the cramped and comfortless bungalow at Bombay. Madras is a station of enormous extent, straggling along 7 or 8 miles of the seashore. Adyar is a suburb at the southern extremity, though through which a small stream finds its way to the sea, and just before it reaches the beach, spreads out into a broad, shallow expanse of water, beside which the Theosophical House stands in extensive ground. Here we found Madame Blavatsky and her heterogeneous household comfortably installed when my wife and I visited her on our way home to England from India in March 1883. The upper rooms of the house were her own private domain. One of these rooms was just built was destined by Madame to be her occult room, her own specially private sanctum. She had especially devoted herself to decorating a certain hanging cupboard to be kept exclusively sacred to the communications passing between the masters and herself, and bestowed upon it the designation the shrine. Here she had established some simple occult treasures, two small portraits she possessed of the Mahatmas, and some other trifles. The purpose of this special receptacle was, of course, perfectly intelligible to everyone familiar with the theory of occult phenomena. A place was kept of all magnetism was kept a place kept pure of all magnetism, but that connected with the work of integrating and disintegrating letters would facilitate the process, and the shrine was used for the transaction of business between the masters and the jailers. 12B William Kwan Judge, December 1882, Adyar, Madras. The headquarters of the Theosophical Society in India are in a suburb of Madras called Adyar, so named from the Adyar River which runs past the building. Washes indeed the base of the wide piazza at the back. The building is made of brick and plaster, painted white, except some rooms erected upon the roof. The ground comprises about 21 acres, bounded in front of the house by a large grove of trees, on the back of the river and on one side by the main road leading out of Madras. There are numerous mango trees in the compound between the house and the main road, and these afford a grateful shade, their spreading branches covering great distances around their trunks. The picture gives the point of view as you come up the drive from the entrance gate. It shows the front of the building as it faces the compound. The porte cochere is seen in perspective. It gives a grand air to the front. The whole building was of a white color, appearing at a distance like a marble structure, but in reality is constructed of brick plastered white, as is very usual in India. Just appearing over the ornamental balustrade which encloses the roof is the front of SPB's own room, which led into the shrine room, shown in the second picture. Her room was an addition to the building and, in a way, served to join the two towers which rise at the back corners at either end. The stairs of the tower illustrated in the second picture were the means of communication with her apartment, although the other tower also had a stairway. The part of the compound extending from the entrance on the highway was full of mango trees, and through them the driveway brought you to the house and under the porte cochere. Aligning Alighting there, a short flight of steps took you up to the entrance hall where the floor was black and white marble. Here there were two tables, sofas, and some chairs. Sorry about that. Alighting there, a short flight of steps took you to the entrance hall where the floor was black and white marble. Here there were two tables, sofas, and some chairs, and on the floor many a night slept Damodar K. Malvalankar together with several others. Part of the end of the building on the side near the main road is given in the second picture. It is a continuation of the corner seen in the first cut. The tower finished the river and the building, and the river itself can be seen just at the back. On the top of the occult room, with the extension of veranda, the roof of the occult room was slanting and tiled in red, the plaster being tinted yellow. In this was the shrine. It was entered from the other side, and being a few feet lower than the rooms used by HPB, a short flight of steps ran down into it. In the tower is a winding brick stairway. Damodar's room was in this tower at the top as you came up the narrow stairs. A corridor, as you may call it, ran the across HPB's rooms from tower to tower, open to the river and giving a view of the little island opposite and the long bridge which carried the highway across the river. The third illustration is reproduced from a photograph of the back of the building from the little island. It shows the other tower, companion to that which was Damodar's room. The lower floor under the roof was the back part of the middle of the building and was occupied by the Theosophist magazine. Trees and shrubs almost hid the view. A plastered embankment ran a short distance along this side so as to protect the foundations. These pictures give a very correct idea of the house when HPB lived in it. 12C Damodar K. Malvalankar, April 1883, Adyar, Madras. Last night was a memorable one. Narsimhahullu Chetty and myself were seated on a chair quite close to Madame Blavatsky's bed, fanning her and talking together as gradually to induce her in sleep. Suddenly, Madame Blavatsky gave a start and exclaimed, "I feel him." Sorry. "I feel him, Mahatma Maurya." She enjoined on us strictly not to leave our places, not to get excited, but remain where we were, and be perfectly quiet. Suddenly she asked for our hands and the right hand of each of us was held by her. Hardly 2 minutes had elapsed, and we saw him coming from the screen door of Madame Blavatsky's bedroom and approaching her. His manner of walking was so gentle that not a footstep, not the slightest sound was audible, nor did he appear to move by his gestures. It was only the change of position that made us see that he had come nearer and nearer. He stood exactly opposite Madame Blavatsky, not quite an arm's length from us. We were on this side of the bed, he on the other. You know, I have seen him often enough to enable me to recognize him at once. His usual long white coat, the peculiar pagdi turban, long hair flowing over the broad shoulders, and the long beard were as usual striking and picturesque. He was standing near a door, the shutters of which were open, though through these, the lamplight and through the window, which were all open, the moonlight were full upon him. And we being in the dark, that is, having no light on our eyes, we being turned against the window through which the moonlight came, we could see distinctly and clearly. He held out and put his hands twice over Madame Blavatsky's head. She then stretched out her hand, which passed through his, a fact proving that what we saw was a Mayavi Rupa, apparitional body, although so vivid and clear as to give one the impression of a material, physical body. She immediately took the letter from his hand. It crumpled, as it were, and made a sound. He then waved his hand towards us, walked a few steps, inaudibly and imperceptibly as before, and disappeared. Madame Blavatsky then handed the letter to me, as it was intended for me. Never shall I forget last night's experience. So clear, so vivid, and tangible it was. 12D Henry S. Olcott, August to September 1883, Uta Command, India. I went to Uta Command to rejoin my colleague HPB at the hospitable home of Major General and Mrs. Morgan. The railway ends at the foot of the Nilgiri Hills, and the traveler proceeds up the well metalled mountain road in a horse tonga or two-wheeled mail cart drawn by a pair of galloping ponies. The ride up is simply charming, and passing through forests by banks of flowers and past swarms of lovely painted butterflies. The air goes cooler and cooler until midway one is obliged to stop at the rest house and change one's tropical costume for heavy woolens and even put on a top coat. At almost every turn in the winding road, splendid panoramas of scenery present themselves to view, while one finds Uttacommand a lovely village of picturesque houses spreading over the foot slopes of the grassy and forest covered adjacent hills, the roads lined with roses, the enclosures joyous with lilies, verbenas, heliotropes. At the toll gate on the Kunur Road, HPB met me in company with our dear Mrs. Morgan, Mrs. Batchelor, and others of the family, the general being absent from home temporarily. My old chum seemed really overjoyed to see me and rattled on in her affectionate way like the one who greets a long absent relative. She was looking well. The champagne like mountain air set her blood to leaping through her body, and she was in the highest spirits about the civilities that were being shown her by some of the high officials and their families. She worked off some of her excitement that same evening by keeping me up until 2 a.m. To read proofs and correct her manuscripts. What an amusing creature she was when in the mood. How she would make a room full of people hang on her lips as she would tell stories of her travels and adventures in search of the wonder workers in magic and sorcery, and their eyes open in amazement when she would, now and again, ring some astral bell or make some raps or do some other minor phenomenon. Our joint desk went on, and the hard labor was diversified with her bright talk and frequent grumblings at the cold, certainly with cause, for the mercury marked 40 degrees more of cold than we feel on the plain. The houses are heated with wood fires in open fireplaces. The wind blows in gusts down the open throated chimneys, filling the room with smoke and dusting one's paper and books with fine ash. HPB wrote in a fur coat with a woolen shawl on her head, and her feet were wrapped in a traveling rug. A funny sight. Part of her work was taking from dictation from her invisible teacher of the replies to an English FTS that she was taking down from dictation was fully apparent to one who was familiar with her ways. On September 16th, we too left beautiful Ooty in Tongas for Coimbatore and then on to Pondicherry. We left Pondicherry for Madras September 23rd and got home that afternoon, rejoiced to see the dear place again. 12E William T. Brown, September to December 1883, India. I sailed from England for India upon the 25th of August. On September 29th, I reached the headquarters of the Theosophical Society at Adyar and was welcomed by Madame Blavatsky, the learned author, editor, and corresponding secretary. I was established in a bungalow situated beautifully by the riverside and felt at home in a very short time. In regard to Madame Blavatsky, never before have I met anyone who evidences such vast and varied learning, nor one who is more large hearted. One evening, shortly after my arrival at Adyar, some letters were being sent by chelas to their masters, and I was permitted to enter the occult room and see the process going on. The letters were put into an almirah, a richly ornamented recess called by some the shrine. There was some 7 of us then present, 4 of whom were chelas. These gentlemen, after placing their letters as aforesaid, offered up incense and prostrated themselves according to the Hindu manner of evincing devotion and respect. In about 2 minutes, Madam, who was standing by my side in an attentive attitude, received a psychic telegram and indicated that the answers had come to hand. The almirah was accordingly opened, and in place of the letters posted, others were there, enclosed in Tibetan envelopes and written on Tibetan paper. Damodar Kemal Valankar, a chela of the master Kuthumi, discovered something more than was expected and exclaimed, "Here is a letter from my master to Mr. Brown." And then I received from his hand a memorandum written with blue pencil. I need hardly say how grateful and honored I felt at being noticed by the Mahatma, whose teachings had so strongly impressed me. I rose, going forward reverently, and said, "Mahatma Kuthumi, I sincerely thank you." Immediately, all those present in the room said, "There is a bell. Did you hear it?" I said I had not. Madame Blavatsky then expressed regret that I had not observed the master's acknowledgement of having heard my words, and said, "Oh, master, let us hear the bell once more, if it is possible." We stood silently for about a minute, and then there was distinctly heard by all of us, myself included, the sound of a bell. After a railway journey from Madras of 6 and 20 hours, I joined Colonel Olcott at the town of Sholapur. I shall confine myself to speaking of a few of the places on our journey to northern India which call for special mention. We arrived at Jabalpur, and on the evening of the lecture, Colonel Olcott, Damodar, several fellows of the society, and I drove down together to the place of the public meeting. There, the colonel delivered an impressive address to a large audience. During the lecture, some 3 or 4 majestic figures had attracted my particular attention. They did not seem to hang about upon the lips of the speaker, as did the rest of the audience, but remained calmly dignified, occasionally only exchanging pleasant glances. I was not surprised to learn afterwards that some Mahatmas had been present at the meeting in astral form. And now let us proceed to Allahabad. At this ancient city, a most stirring lecture was delivered. Here I saw and recognized the Mahatma Kutumi. Although I was unable to look at him but for a minute, I knew that it was he and recognized him by his portrait, which I had scrutinized some weeks before. On our return to the bungalow we were being entertained, at which we were being entertained, my impression was corroborated by Damodar, who volunteered the remark that his master had been there. Damodar, I may remark, had not been in the lecture. The place to which our narrative really next pertains is the city of Lahore. Here, as elsewhere, Colonel Olcott delivered stirring addresses to large audiences. But Lahore has a special interest because there we saw in his own physical body Mahatma Kutumi himself. On the afternoon of 19th November, I saw the master in broad daylight and recognized him, and on the morning of the 20th, he came to my tent and said, "Now you see me before you in the flesh. Look and assure yourself that it is I," and left a letter of instruction and silk, silk handkerchief. This letter is, as usual, written seemingly with the blue pencil. It is the same handwriting as that in which is written communications received at Madras and has been identified by above a dozen persons as bearing the calligraphy of Mahatma Kutumi. The letter was the effect that I had seen The letter was to the effect that I had first seen him in visions, then in his astral form, then in body at a distance, and finally now saw him in his own physical body so close as to enable me to give to my countrymen the assurance that I was from personal knowledge as sure of the existence of the Mahatmas as I was of my own. On the evening of 21st, after the lecture was over, Colonel Olcott, Damodar, and I were sitting outside the Shamiana pavilion or pandal, temporary open-sided shelter roofed with bamboo matting, when we were visited by Dhwal Khul, the master's head jailer, who informed us that master was about to come. The master then came near to us, gave instructions to Damodar, and walked away. On leaving Lahore, the next place visited was Jammu, the winter residence of His Highness the Maharaja of Kashmir. We enjoyed a most inspiring holiday in view of the Himalayan mountains. At Jammu, I had another opportunity of seeing Mahatma Kutumi in propria persona. On one evening, I went to the end of the compound, private enclosure, and there I found the master awaiting my approach. I saluted in European fashion and came, not came hat in hand to within a few yards of the place where he was standing. And after a minute, he marched away, and the noise of his footsteps on the gravel being markedly audible. 12F. Henry S. Olcott, November 19th, to 20th, 1883, Lahore. In Colonel Olcott's diary for Tuesday, November 20th, 1883, the entry reads 1:55 a.m. Kuthumi came in body to my tent. Woke me up suddenly out of sleep, pressed a note wrapped in silk into my left hand, and laid his hand upon my head. He then passed into Miss Brown's compartment and integrated another note in his Brown's hand. He spoke to me. My camp was thronged with visitors during the 3 days of our stay, and I gave 2 lectures under the largest shamiana to multitudes, with great pots of fire standing along the sides to modify the biting November cold. I was sleeping in my tent the night of the 19th when I rushed back towards external consciousness on feeling a hand laid on me, the camp being on the open plain and beyond the protection of the Lahore police. My first instinct was to protect myself from some possible religious fanatical assassin. So I clutched the stranger by the upper arm and asked him in Hindustani who was he and what he wanted. It was all done in an instant, and I held the man tight, as would one who might be attacked the next moment and have to defend his life. But the next instant, a kind and sweet voice said, "Do you not know me? Do you not remember me?" It was the voice of Master Cage. A swift revulsion of feeling came over me. I relaxed my hold on his arm, joined my palms in reverential salutation, and wanted to jump out of bed to show him respect. But his hand and voice stayed me, and after a few sentences had been exchanged, he took my left hand in his, gathered the fingers of his right into the palm, and stood quiet beside my cot, from which I could see his divinely benignant face by the light of the lamp that burnt on a packing case at his back. Presently, I felt some soft substance forming in my hand, and the next minute the master laid his kind hand on my forehead, uttered a blessing, and left my half of the large tent to visit W. T. Brown, who slept on the other half, behind a canvas screen that divided the tent into 2 rooms. When I had time to pay attention to myself, I found myself holding in my left hand a folded paper enwrapped in a silken cloth. To go to the lamp, open, and read it was naturally my first impulse. I found it to be a letter of a private counsel. On hearing an exclamation from Brown's side of the screen, I went in there and he showed me a silk wrapped letter of like appearance to mine, although of different contents, which he said had been given him much as mine had been given to me, and which we both read together. The next evening, after the visits to Mr. Brown and myself, we two and Damodar sat in my tent at 10 o'clock, waiting for an expected visit from Master Cage. The camp was quiet. The rest of our party dispersed through the city of Lahore. We sat on chairs at the back of the tent so as not to be observed from the camp. The moon was in the last quarter and had not risen. After some waiting, we heard and saw a tall Hindu approaching from the side of the open plain. He came to within a few yards of us and beckoned Damodar to come to him, which he did. He told him that the master would appear within a few minutes and that he had some business with Damodar. It was a pupil of Master Cage. Presently we saw the latter coming from the same direction, past his pupil who had withdrawn to a little distance, and stop in front of our group, now standing and saluting in the Indian fashion, some yards away. Brown and I kept our places, and Damodar went and conversed for a few minutes with the teacher. after which he returned to us and the king-like visitor walked away. I heard his footsteps on the ground floor. Before retiring, when I was writing my diary, the pupil lifted the portiere, beckoned to me, and pointed to the figure of the master waiting for me on the plain in the starlight. I went to him and we walked off to a safe place at some distance where intruders need not be expected. And then for about half an hour, he told me what I had to know. There was no miracles done at the interview, just two men talking together, a meeting and a parting when the talk was over. 12G Damodar K. Malvalankar, November to December 1883, Lahore, India, and later at Jammu, Kashmir. While my tour of northern India with Colonel Olcott While on my tour of northern India with Colonel Olcott, we reached Lahore, where we expected to meet in body my master Kuthumi. There I was visited in body for 3 nights consecutively, and in one case even went outside the house, meeting the master in the compound, re-entering the house with him, offering him a seat, and then holding a long converse. Moreover, him whom I saw in person at Lahore was the same I had seen in astral form at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society, and the same again whom I, in my visions and trances, had seen at his house, thousands of miles off, to reach which is my astral ego I was permitted, owing of course to his direct help and protection. In those instances, with my psychic powers hardly developed yet, I had always seen him as a rather hazy form, although his features were perfectly distinct and their remembrance was profound, graven on my soul's eye and memory. While now at Lahore, Jammu, and elsewhere, the impression was utterly different. In former cases, when making pranams, my hand passed through his form, while on the latter occasion they met solid garments and flesh. I sat not here, I shall not here dwell upon the fact of his being corporeally seen by both Colonel Olcott and Mr. Brown separately for 2 nights at Lahore. Later at Jammu, I had the good fortune of being sent for and permitted to visit a sacred ashram, while where I remained for a few days in the blessed company of several men of much doubted Mahatmas. I remained for a few days in the blessed company of several of the much doubted Mahatmas of Himawat and their disciples. There I met not only my beloved Guru Deva Kuthumi and Colonel Olcott's Master Maurya, but several others of the fraternity, including one of the highest. Thus I saw my beloved Guru not only as a living man, but actually as a young one in comparison with some other sadhus of the blessed company, only far kinder and not above a merry remark and conversation at times. Thus, on the second day of my arrival, after the meal hour, I was permitted to hold an intercourse for over an hour with my master. Asked by him smilingly what it was that made me look at him so perplexedly, I asked in my turn, "How is it, master, that some of the members of our society have taken into their heads a notion that you were an elderly man, and that they have e- even seen you clairvoyantly looking an old man past 60?" To which he pleasantly smiled and said that this latest misconception was due to the reports of a certain pupil of a Vedantic Swami as to his being perceived clairvoyantly as an elderly man. That could never be, he added, as real clairvoyance could lead no one into such mistaken notions. And then he kindly reprimanded me for giving any importance to the age of a guru, adding that appearances were often false, etc., and explaining other points. 12H, Bhavani Shankar, January 1884, Jabalpur, India. In the month of January 1884, I was at Jabalpur with brother Nivaran Chandra Mukherjee, who was then the secretary of the local branch of the Theosophical Society. One night while I was with him, I was talking to some 27 members of that branch and they were listening to me with great attention. On a sudden, there was a death-like silence for some time. I then felt the influence of Madame Blavatsky's venerated master, Maurya, and it was so strong that I could not bear it. The current of electricity generated by an electromagnetic battery is nothing compared with that current generated by the trained will of the adept. When a Mahatma means to show himself to a chela, he sends off a current of electricity to the chela indicating his approach. It was this influence which I felt at that time. A few minutes after, the Mahatma Maurya was actually present in the room where the meeting of the members was held and was seen by me and brother Nivaran, while some of the members only felt the influence. All the members would have seen him much more while vividly had it not been for the fact that he did not materialize himself much more objectively. I have seen the same Mahatma several times in his astral double during my travels in north of India. Not only have I seen Madame Blavatsky's master in his double, but also my venerated guru Deva KH. I have also seen Master KH in physical body. 12I Franz Hartmann, December 1883 to February 1884, Adyar, Madras, India, and later at Bombay. On the evening of December 4th, 1883, I arrived at Madras and was kindly received by Mr. G. Muthuswami Chettiar, who conducted me to his carriage and away we went towards Adyar, situated in the suburb of the city of Madras, about 6 miles from the landing place of the steamer. It was dark when we arrived, and the object of my dreams, who was said to possess the key that was to open to me before the sanctum of occultism, was sitting in the lighted entrance hall, surrounded by a few friends, poor and yet envied. Madame Blavatsky, the sphinx of the 19th century, at once a sage and a woman. She upon whose brow shines the serene tranquillity of a god, and who, a minute afterwards, will fly into a stew because the coffee is too hot. Her appearance neither surprised nor disappointed me. A stately figure, dressed in a loose, flowing robe, she might as well have sat for the picture of one of the saints, and her kind and cordial manner at once gained my confidence. Before retiring to rest, I expressed a desire to see the pictures of the Mahatmas, these mysterious beings superior to man, of whom I had heard so much, and I was taken upstairs to see the shrine in which those pictures were kept. The pictures represented two men with oriental features and corresponding dress. The expression of their faces was mild and yet serene. A week or two after my arrival at Adyar, seeing that several others, strangers as well as members of our society, occasionally received letters from the masters, either by having them dropped from the air, thrust at them through solid walls, or sent to them through the shrine, I concluded to try whether I might be equally fortunate. Accordingly, I wrote the following lines. Reverend Master, the undersigned offers you his services. He desires that you would kindly examine his mental capacity and, if desirable, give him further instructions. Respectfully yours, etc. I copy this letter verbatim so that the reader may not think me to so silly as to trouble the adepts of the Himalayas with my little private affairs. I am in the habit of keeping my own counsel, and there was not one in India or outside of San Francisco that knew anything about my affairs. I gave my letter to Colonel Olcott and he put it into the shrine. A couple of days afterwards, I reasoned with myself about this matter and thought that if the masters should find it worth the while to say anything to me, they would undoubtedly do so without my asking, and I therefore begged Colonel Olcott to return me my letter. Colonel Olcott would have done so, but my letter had disappeared in a mysterious manner. In its place, I received another, the contents of which show not only a complete knowledge of some events of my past life, but it also went into details about my very private business. It will be perceived that this letter was not given as a test, although it was a test to me, but to give me some information and advice which afterwards proved very useful to me. Later, I saw Mahatma Moria in his astral form. He appeared to me accompanied by the astral forms of two chelas. His presence left an exhilarating and elevating influence which did not fade away until several days after. The impaired health of Madame Blavatsky had rendered it desirable that she should have a change of air, and the physicians which were consulted advised her to go to Europe, where Colonel Olcott was called on an account of some official business. Madame Blavatsky therefore resolved to accompany Colonel Olcott, and having received an urgent invitation to visit the Thakur Sahib of Badwan and our friend Hari Singh ji, she made up her mind to visit them before embarking at Bombay. 2 days before Madame Blavatsky left, February 5th, 1884, I went unasked up to her room to speak with her in regards to society matters. After this conversation, the thought came in my mind to ask her opinion in regards to a certain subject which I had been thinking. Madame Blavatsky advised me to apply to the Master Moria himself to ask him mentally, and that the Master himself would answer my questions. A few seconds later, she said she felt his presence and that she saw him writing. I must say, I too felt his influence and seemed to see his face. But of course, the circumstance will carry conviction to no one but myself. Just then, another lady came in, to my great annoyance, and expressed her wish to have a pair of pincers, which was needed for some purpose. And remembering that I had such a pair of pincers in the drawer of my writing desk, I went downstairs into my room to get them. I opened the drawer, saw the pincers and few other things in there, but no vestige of any letter, as I had removed my papers the day before another place. I took the pincers and I was about to close the drawer, whence there lay in the drawer a great envelope addressed to me in a well known handwriting of the master, with a seal bearing his initials in Tibetan character. On opening it, I found a very kind letter treating of the identical questions about which I had been talking with Madame Blavatsky, beside giving a detailed and satisfactory answer to the very question which had so perplexed my mind, and a satisfactory explanation of certain matters which for some time had been foremost in my mind, but of which I had said nothing at all. Moreover, there was in the same envelope a photograph, cabinet size, of the master's face, with a dedication to me at the back. Now, if I know anything at all, I know that my drawer contains no such letter. When I opened it, and there was nobody visible in my room at that time, the letter giving a detailed answer to my question must have been written, sealed, and put into the drawer in less than 4 minutes, while it took exactly 40 minutes to copy it the next day. Finally, it treated a very difficult problem in such an elaborate and yet concise manner that only an intelligence of the highest order could have done the same. On the 7th of February, Madame Blavatsky, Mohini Chatterjee, and myself, in the company of Madame Coulomb, left Adyar for Bombay. On the way, we stopped at the residence of Thakur Sahib of Vadhavan. I left Vadhavan on the 15th of February in company with Madame Blavatsky and Mohini. We were on our way to Bombay. A few hours before we started, Madame Blavatsky had read an article of mine, corrected a few words, and returned it to me. I read it carefully to see what corrections she had made and whether I might myself not make some changes. I only found a few words corrected and folded the paper, put it in my pocketbook, deposited the pocketbook in my satchel, locked the same, and entered the car of the train and put the satchel on my seat, where it never left me and never was out of my sight until the event which I am about to describe occurred. We travelled on, Madame Blavatsky being in the same car. Towards evening, Madame Blavatsky requested me to see her the article again. I took it out of my satchel, unfolded the paper before handing it to her, and as I did so, imagine my surprise to find on it four long lines written on a space which was blank before, in the well known handwriting of our master, and in a different kind of ink than that used by Madame Blavatsky. How that writing could have been done in my satchel during the shaking of the car, I do not pretend to explain. Another incident occurred at Bombay when I was alone by myself. On the morning of the 20th February, I received a curious Tibetan medal from our master through Madame Blavatsky. I then accompanied her on board the steamer on which she was to sail for Europe. On my return to the shore, I went into a native jewelry shop and brought a locket to deposit my medal, but could not find a chain long enough for my purpose. I then returned to my room and paced the floor, studying what to do in regard to the chain. I finally came to the conclusion that I would buy a rose colored silk ribbon, but where to get it? Being a stranger in Bombay, that was a question. My pacing the floor brought me again in front of the open window, and there, right before me on the floor, lay exactly the very silk ribbon, brand new and just the one I wanted.